Today on the LowDOWN, a Down Syndrome podcast, we celebrate 100 episodes of the LowDOWN and invite you to ask us anything. Over to you, Hannah Marla.
Thanks, Danielle. This episode is brought to you by our Season 10 sponsor, the Ames Family Foundation. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the LowDOWN podcast, to our 100th episode.
It's a bit wild, to be honest.
Wild. I'm joined here by my wonderful partner in crime, Marla Folden, SLP at the DSRF. Marla, can you believe we've made it 100 episodes?
No and yes.
No and yes.
I think no, because it sounds like a big number, but when I think about all of the many hours of research and interviewing, yes, I can. Because this is a big part of our off the side of our desk side hustle jobs.
100%. Passion, project.
Yeah.
Yes.
Totally.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit. So the structure of this episode is going to be a little different for those of you that listen. We're not going to have any secret questions, but we did the title of this episode is Ask Us Anything. And so we have a few questions that were submitted to us by our listeners. So we will get to those in a little bit, but we just wanted to reminisce a little bit and talk about how this whole process got started. What were those early days like? Marla, do you remember our first day of recording the LowDOWN?
I do. We're talking 2020. We're talking early March of 2020. Things were about to get really spicy.
Mm-hmm.
And our very first episode, we interviewed Jill Baldwin. She's an SLP here as well, about early communication.
Mm-hmm.
And we were new to the technology. We have big fancy microphones. Who even knows what's happening half the time? But they didn't work. So we had to re-record the whole thing because we didn't know that they weren't working when we were doing it.
Yeah.
And then by the time our second episode came around, we were no longer allowed to be in person.
Yeah.
I think we did one episode where I was at your house.
Yeah, in a different room.
In a separate room.
Mm-hmm.
That was something. And then the remainder of that season, I recorded from a closet in my house because it was the only room. It was the only square footage that didn't have toddlers in it. So that was my only option there.
Yeah.
It's gotten a lot more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Since then I'm on a chair
stepped up
now.
our game a little bit. We, like I said, we've had really fancy microphones, and we do definitely want to take this opportunity to bring forth a person who does not like to be in the center of attention, which is our wonderful producer, Glenn Hoos, who was also the mastermind behind the LowDOWN podcast, and had approached us as a staff at DSR to be like, hey, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. And I think Marla and I were immediately like, sign us up, because this is a bit of a passion project for both of us. And we really like to learn. And it's something that we're podcast junkies ourselves, all three of us. And it was just timing worked out perfectly. But Glenn has done an enormous amount of work from behind the scenes. He's going to be a featured guest this year, so we're very excited about that, talking about something he's passionate about. But yeah, it was all in all to say it was a team effort. It's a lot of work involved in getting a podcast ready. Should we tell our listeners just a little bit about what our process is like, how we get ready for each season, just so they kind of have an idea? So generally what happens is we record twice a year, a season each. And usually it's one recording is done towards the end of the summer, and then one recording period is usually in March-ish. And then Glenn does all of his fancy work and the behind the scenes to get everything ready. But yeah, Marla, do you want to talk a little bit about how we choose the topics?
We have, an ongoing list that we kind of workshop. We meet a few times before the season. We do a little divide and conquer moment to see who's going to talk to whom, and to invite people to be on the show. We always aim for a balance of technical and not so technical episodes, something that people will relate to. That we contact those people after doing our background research to make sure that those are indeed the correct people. And then there's usually more side research to do, so that we can develop appropriate questions based on whether or not people will attend. We make great use of the Dismeg, which is the Down Syndrome Medical Interest Research Group, or Medical Interest Group, out of the States, which kind of collects professionals and specialists who have a clinical interest in people with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
So we, comb through those listings quite carefully to get our ideas rolling. And then a lot of our ideas for episodes come from our clinical experience here.
Yeah.
And insights that we've had, great parent questions or conundrums that have, well, not great conundrums, but things that we've felt, ooh, this is probably something that a lot of people experience. So that kind of happens. And then we set it up for an intensive recording week where we record multiple episodes per day for a week to get everything fit in there and try not to lose our voices in the process.
Yeah, exactly. And all of that has now culminated into our 10th season. And we have some fun stats to share. And we're very, very proud of this project. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the feedback that we've gotten from people. But just to run down a few stats that Glenn gathered for us. So this is our 10th season. We've done 102 episodes, over 70,000 downloads, 691 listeners per episode. So this actually puts us in the top 10% of all podcasts. So
that is bonkers.
That is bonkers. I mean, there are a lot of podcasts out there.
There
but
really are. And
us,
this is pretty niche.
It's pretty niche. Exactly. Yeah. And it's pretty cool. The day that Glenn told us that, Marla and I were just like, wow.
A little dance.
We did a little celebratory dance. And it just made all that work worthwhile. We were just like, we would do it if only one person was listening, but it just makes it that much more motivating for us to keep going and making it better every season.
And I think it does tell us that people want this information.
Yes, absolutely.
So that in itself is very rewarding because we thought that people wanted this information. It's good to have your hopes and dreams confirmed.
Absolutely.
By some nice data.
100%. Yes. The demand is out there for sure. And there are other wonderful podcasts about Down syndrome as well. So definitely go check them out. But we are just, we're very, very happy that to be part of that group. And so some of our top 5 episodes that listeners have kind of pointed out to us have been learning and development in individuals with Down syndrome, reversing course, Down syndrome and regression, family-centered positive behavior support, Fantasyland when imagination gets carried away, and moving on up, the transition to adulthood. So even in this list of 5 episodes, we're understanding a little bit about where the demand is, what people want to learn more about. And it's a very wide range of topics as we can see. And then I think this is a cool stat that we have listeners on every continent except Antarctica. So other than that, we're hitting all those continents, which I think is super cool. Yeah, really, really great. Did you want to share a little bit about maybe some of the feedback you've gotten about the podcast from families or people that have emailed us or talked to us in person about this?
Yeah, we do sometimes get emails from people saying, I listened to this, thank you for making it, and I live in, XYZ rural location. And those, we're trying to reach everybody, but those are the people that we really want to reach because we just feel we've identified this gap in service provision where people who live more remotely, as much of Canada is, don't get access to the same kinds of information, the same quality of information, or get to talk to the same specialists, right? And one thing that you can do on a podcast that's really hard to pull off in real life is you can appeal to people and get people in the same room as you who are very, very specialized in something. And these are people that you can't get an appointment with because you don't live in the same country or whatever, but we can interview them on general terms for a podcast and get that information spread quite widely, which has been a real driver for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had a couple of people reach out to us about wanting to start their own podcast. So, that's great. Like people are learning and wanting to disseminate information on their own terms. So that has been really great.
Yes.
It's very, very fulfilling when people come up to us and let us know, and not in terms of, boosting our ego or anything, but we just love that people listen. We love that people find it helpful. And that's kind of all at the end of the day what we want to do.
And it does come with some responsibility,
yes,
I feel.
Absolutely.
Some people have shared with us that they have migrated because of this information, and they found out about this clinic and they have moved their family here from elsewhere. And that comes with a
Very
tremendous responsibility
Absolutely.
to uphold the kind of values and quality of service that we are known for.
Yeah.
But that's kind of, how would we describe? Surprising, humbling all
for
of the
sure.
things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is a big sense of responsibility and something that we don't take lightly. And we do love getting feedback from families about what they want to know and what's working, what's not. So we're listening. So definitely, when you're making those comments in the comment section or emailing us, we've had a few guests that have actually approached us to be like, hey, I would love to do an episode on a book that I wrote or on this particular topic. So that's wonderful. If you think that you might be a great guest, definitely reach out to us and let us know. We're always open to collaborating. So one of the first questions that was submitted to us was, what do you find most satisfying about moderating these podcasts? Did you want to go first? I mean, we kind of answered it, but maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I like people. I like people who think similarly and differently than myself. I like people who can talk about their experience and their passions, whoever they might be. And I like conversation quite a lot. And so this is really rewarding in that regard. I don't know how you feel, Hina.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just find, selfishly, I love doing these podcasts because I learn. It's such a great opportunity for me to learn myself. And so many times I've quoted our guests to families or to fellow colleagues or to whoever was willing to listen. That I think that is probably one of the biggest things that I've gotten out of moderating is not only learning from our guests, but learning from each other. Marla and I have been guests on these podcasts and have had a chance to interview each other, as Glenn as well. So it's a very, we're very fortunate to be able to have access to this information, and to be able to learn and disseminate. So I think that's great. And and it's fun. When we first started, I was like, I don't know, like, how am I going to be? And I feel like I'm growing as a moderator myself. I'm learning a lot from Marla, and she has a really great style, and from other people. So I think it's a good skill. Talking to people is a good skill to develop. So I think that's been really great for me as well.
Well,
so.
I just had to make a face about that because I feel like I'm learning more from Hina than she could learn from me. Hina, what do you think? What's something that's like impacted you immensely during these, the past 99 episodes?
Yeah. Honestly, just a few seasons ago, we decided to do our family spotlights, and student spotlights. And I think we are fortunate enough to work with and alongside so many wonderful families and individuals with Down syndrome that I think those things have been very impactful, because I think we've had a couple of families that have said that it's been very therapeutic and cathartic for them to be able to tell their story. And that and we've had families, like you've said, Marla, that have heard these stories and have related to them and have now, picked up their lives and moved. So I think that's a pretty big impact to know that somebody feels heard and that they have a platform to tell their story. Yeah. What about you?
I would say a similar thing, but maybe from a slightly different angle. I think I would say, as much as we can have a great time getting into the weeds on medical things, both Hina and I are passionate about
Big time.
those things. What has become really clear to me, or clearer than ever, I suppose, is that the family relationship needs to be first and highest priority, and everything else is kind of secondary. And that's because, in part, the medical things never end, and then also because of the gifts that we've been given from these families who have been so open with us and sharing their stories. So yeah, similar to you.
Yeah. Okay. One of our other questions that we received was, why do students with Down syndrome often show inconsistent acquisition of skills, and what can teachers do to help? I love that we got a question from an educator. This is amazing.
Very good question.
Yeah. Why don't you start us off with that one?
It is an important thing to notice.
Yeah.
First of all, I would say nobody acquires skills consistently over time without any blips or any pauses or any reversals and then moving forward. Learning is not a perfectly linear thing. But yes, we should definitely acknowledge that people with Down syndrome definitely have more variability and more reversals, more pauses, plateaus than a neurotypical group. This has a lot to do with health, of course, and sleep and sickness and other things related to those. Hearing, intermittent hearing loss, those kinds of things. Why would it be inconsistent? Well, they might not be feeling very well, so they're not going to show their highest degree of learning on any given day. But also, things might have moved on too quickly before real mastery was achieved, so that the person didn't have a real thorough learning of whatever the concept was. And then people moved on with when they weren't ready. And then, you know, it didn't actually make it to the long-term memory, or it's not available for recall. So those are the things that I would note. What would you note on that, Hina?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the complex medical profile that comes along with Down syndrome is definitely something to keep top of mind. I think even in our conversations with teachers and families, Marla and I are always like, get the medical stuff checked out first, because those are the things that are, at least if that is oftentimes that is the issue, is some sort of a medical thing that's making it difficult. But I was also going to say sometimes an inconsistent acquisition of skill can be if maybe the foundations have not been laid properly.
That's right.
So especially from an OT perspective, you know, if I have kids coming in that are having trouble with things like writing or cutting with scissors or any kind of fine motor work, I often kind of go back to thinking about the foundations and like how have those skills been introduced. Have some of those foundational skills like strength and dexterity and all those things been built in, because we don't want to skip steps. For somebody who's already having a hard time learning some of those complex skills, we want to make sure that we arm them with as much foundation as possible so that those skills are sustainable and long lasting. So I think that can be one thing. And then also, you know, people with disabilities and people with Down syndrome love their routine, love their structure. So I think sometimes some changes in routine and structure, if not done properly, of course, flexibility is important, can also make it a little harder to learn new skills and to maintain that, because it's just too much too soon, like you said, Marla. And I think those are some of the things to kind of keep in mind as well.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to be said for exploring fairly widely. Many of my students show what we would technically call like splinter skills, or like really high skills in like a very specific area, generally an area of interest. And then if you use that as your baseline, you're going to be constantly surprised when there's other things that aren't the same or don't show the same degree of like confidence and depth of concept. So I always like to kind of ask around the topic to see, okay, outside of your favorite thing, how are we doing with, you know, language or speech or some of these kinds of things.
And I think it's a good point to also think about comparison. I think we've had these conversations many times that if you're comparing the acquisition of a particular skill from one person with Down syndrome to another person with Down syndrome or a person without Down syndrome, it's very different, right? Like it's unfair of us to compare two very different people with two very different learning styles and kind of base them on that same level.
Right. Yeah. I prefer self-comparison. So I look at somebody's like most area of most interest versus their area of moderate or neutral interest versus their area of non-preferred interest, and like what's the spread on that? Is there any way to bring those things so that if they get into a situation where they need to be able to talk about something that's not their preferred thing, like can we do that for safety, for getting through your day, for having peer interactions, those kinds of things. And we try and balance it out a little bit.
Yeah, and everybody, you know, and it's just like a little advice for families too, and teachers and therapists out there that are working, is that, you know, skills develop at a rate that when established, that works best for that one person, right? So you have to kind of judge that one person on their own and not against another criteria or another norm population.
Yeah, so it's just not that helpful.
It's just not that helpful. Yeah, absolutely.
I have one for you.
Sure, go for it.
You're going to love this. How does hypotonia impact daily life and functioning of individuals? So with Down syndrome, you have 5 hours. Go.
Yeah, and I could probably fill in
I think
every
you
one of
could.
those
I think you
minutes in those 5 hours. Yeah, no, this is a great question. And I think and the reason why this is a great question is because I think it's often something that we kind of just, like, we know that people with Down syndrome have low tone, and we just kind of, assign that as a characteristics and kind of move on. But we really don't understand how significant the impact is for them in everything that they do every day. So for those of you that may not be familiar, hypotonia, also known as low tone, refers to the absence of that tension in your muscles. So that almost all of us have. We all have tension in our muscles, but people with Down syndrome have even less. So if you imagine me holding a rubber band in my hand, just the way a normal rubber band is, and then if I go from the normal position and I pull it out a little bit, it just takes a little bit of energy for me to make it nice and tight. Now, if you hold that rubber band in your mind and you push it in even more, make it even more slack, from that slack position to back out again, it requires much more effort. This is a really good visual in person. So hopefully those of you that are picturing this with me understand that people with Down syndrome require so much more exertion and effort to activate those muscles in order for you to get the proper tone. So this is why it's difficult for a lot of people with Down syndrome to sit for a very long time if they don't have proper support. It impacts their feeding, it impacts their speech, and it impacts a lot of their everyday life because we require our muscles and our joints to work with us, and oftentimes it works against them.
Yeah. I have another example that I could add to this. One very, very frequent occurrence that I hear a lot in my office is, this person is really sensitive to loud noises. And surprisingly, it has everything to do with muscle tone. You have some muscles in your ear that are holding these 3 nifty bones in place, and all of the body has low muscle tone, including these tiny, tiny muscles of the ear. These muscles have the job of becoming tense when there's a loud sound, and we're talking milliseconds. They should respond really fast and impede the movement of these bones so that your hearing is not damaged.
Yeah.
Right? In the transference of the mechanical to the chemical or nerve impulses. And those muscles are low tone. They take longer to respond, which means that people with Down syndrome experience sounds that are loud as much louder. Their bodies are not helping them at all to dampen those sounds. And sounds can be painful. If anybody's heard, some kind of explosion or been around a jet taking off without hearing protection, sounds can hurt you. And that is what is happening. And that's why people respond with such an extreme reaction when they hear things like an ambulance siren, or fireworks or marching bands, and those kinds of things. That is a tone-based issue. And once you know some of those things about tone and how it impacts like really everything, you know where to look for your tools too.
It's a whole body experience, right?
Exactly.
It's like everything from hearing, feeding, toileting is
digestion,
digestion. Some of the gross motor things that our guys do. It's a whole body thing. So it is. And then for those of you that are listening out there, there's lots of ways. People have asked me many times, like, does tone change over time? And it can and it can't. But I think there's a lot that we can do to improve it, right? So a lot of opportunities to activate those muscles, strengthen the core muscles. But you can't go from like very low tone to like, perfect tone. That doesn't happen, but it's just like working with what you have and using it in the right way and supporting it in the right way.
And you can be strong, still have low tone.
Still have low tone. Absolutely.
Those are not the same thing. And I think people get really confused because in like exercise world, people talk about getting toned, like toning your muscles, and this is not that. This is not what we're talking about.
No.
So
absolutely.
There's that.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to our next question. So when you're working with a client, I like this question a lot. When you're working with a client that isn't making much progress, or at least you aren't observing much, how do you stay engaged and motivated to continue your practice?
Ooh.
It's a big question.
Good. So good. Well, this happens. And it can happen for a variety of reasons. So the first thing I try to do is figure out why we're not making progress. And if I can figure that out and work together with a family on like fixing that or making that whatever the problem is smaller, then I will do that. Sometimes I have the wrong goals going. Let's be real. Like sometimes I've aimed in the wrong direction and it's maybe not what the parents are most motivated for. So they're not doing the thing at home, or it's not what the kid feels is important to them. And we do have a process here of talking to kids, teens and adults whenever they're able to do so. And I want their input on what they want to be learning, because if they are learning something that's of interest to them, or if we can explain it in a way that makes sense to them, then we have, really reduced our workload there. So I think about those things. There's always the option of pausing a goal, going lateral, working something else, coming back to it. I'll give you an example. I had a student with a really significant underbite. So the lower jaw is protruding over the upper jaw. And clearly from that kind of position, they weren't able to move their lip enough to make like the F and V sounds. Well, we can't overcome their structure in that. We tried a bunch of things. We tried some inversion. We tried a variety of things, and we could not make that kind of sound. I was like, well, we could keep working on it, but we won't get it. It doesn't reach. We can't do it. So we're going to leave it until you've had some orthodontia. And then we'll come back to that. And in the meantime, let's not spin our wheels. Like, let's do something else that will also be helpful for you. What do you do with this situation?
No, all of those for sure. I think that oftentimes we as therapists really do need to talk to our families and self-reflect on the goals that we create, like you said, that are meaningful or not. And even for I love the idea, depending on our students' communication level, to make them part of the process. But even for some of my very little kids, like my 1 and 2 year olds, oftentimes they will tell me in one way or another if something is working for them or not. They will tell me in a way that works for them. So if it's happened enough times, or I'm like, I see a pattern here, I don't think this is kind of where you were at the moment. And that's the important thing. It's just like sometimes you need to pause on things for a little bit. It doesn't mean that we're giving up on those goals. We might need to restructure, like Marla said. But one of my biggest things is I try to help families understand the idea of taking a break for consolidation. Right? And we've had families in the past that have been like, oh, I don't know. But then they're like, oh, Hannah, you were right. I have one student in particular that every year they take a break over the summer. They come to me for weekly sessions. They take a break over the summer. That's never changed in the few years that I've been seeing him. And I just see this massive like energy that comes back when they come back from the summer break. They're wanting to learn more. They have consolidated those skills. The parents don't even really need to work on it that much. It just, their brains need time. Their brains need rest. And it's made a big difference. So I think sometimes as a therapist, we have to kind of talk to the families about why we why we ask for like breaks and practice periods is because we see our students here in a somewhat artificial environment. It's a one-on-one. You have all of our attention. You have all the cool toys, all the cool things. And a very exuberant therapist working with you. But those goals will truly be more meaningful, and you'll work on them when we're able to practice them outside of the clinic setting. So I think that's a really important component. And educating our families about that is really important too.
And if we, think a little bit more broadly, there is a reason that school doesn't run infinitely all year round, right? And that is the same purpose,
same idea.
Right? We see more motivation, we see more engagement, we see brains that have matured a little bit after taking a break. And those things are all good things. And the other side of the same piece there is that sometimes we're not seeing progress because therapy is not a good fit for a family at that particular time. Families have changes in dynamics, changes in structure. People move, people have surgery, things go on.
Absolutely.
And I don't want families to feel like they need to be sticking it out and coming if they're so over capacity. That just doesn't make sense.
Because it's just adding to your stress then, right? And the other thing I was going to say also is that I think sometimes it's just good to take a break as people. Like, I'm sure the kid is sick and tired of seeing me weekly. They need a break from me, right? And so it's good for them to take a break, and it allows therapists to also reconfigure. So many times after long stretches of breaks, when my kids come back, I'm just like, I have these cool new ideas that we're going to try. So it gives us an opportunity to recharge. So it's really a good practice overall for everybody to take a break. But in terms of this question, I think how we stay engaged and motivated is by kind of, self-reflecting on kind of why we're there, what the goals are, and what the parents want.
Thinking laterally.
Thinking laterally, yeah.
Another question for you. Teenagers, what are some things to think about with mood and behavior changes in adolescents and teens? Because it is very hard to tease out whether this is a hormone thing or like a more serious thing. I have a lot on this topic, and I know you do too.
Yeah,
so
How about we just shoot off one at a time at each other, because I feel like we're going to cover the same things.
We will. we will.
But yeah, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think medical things are always the best place to start.
Yep.
So, of course, as you're becoming teenagers, there's a lot going on with the body. So that alone in itself, start of puberty and a lot of mixed feelings, understanding what's going on with your body can, of course, lead to difficulties managing mood and understanding kind of what's going on around you. So that would be one thing that I would start off with. What about you?
I think when we're thinking mental health related, so things like depression have both positive and negative symptomology. And here we're less likely to see some of that positive symptomology. We have to rely on some of the negative ones, like the withdrawal. So the things that are not happening, that used to be happening. Yeah. Right. So we're not enjoying things. We're not participating in things. We're not able to go to the same places that we went to before. And if you're starting to see a lot of those things, but you're not seeing some of the positive symptoms, like some agitation, some anger, some of that, or people are not saying, positive symptoms, saying how you feel bad, you feel rotten. If people aren't telling you those things, but you're still seeing a lot of negative symptoms, it's time to go in. It's time to see somebody for that. We have to consider, I would say, for this community whose expressive communication has so many challenges, taking a fairly aggressive medical approach to intervention for some of these mental health things, even if we're not hearing directly from the person that, like, I'm having really bad self thoughts. That's a level of thinking that many of my students don't demonstrate, if that makes sense.
But they could still be having those thoughts, just not able.
They're not able to tell you.
Yeah,
exactly. So that's one that comes front of mind there. The degree of mood and behavior change is one to consider. What else did you want to add?
I think just also, so we're thinking physiological and mental wellness, and then I think also it's important to think in terms of environmental as well. So what is going on in the immediate environment of that person? So are there any major transitions happening? Bereavement and grief is a really big one.
Yes.
Especially with people with Down syndrome. It's really it's a very long lasting sense of them trying to figure out their emotions and their mood. And transitions, so many of my late teens just get so stressed out and their mood changes so much when they know that they're ending the year of high school, or even ending the year of a grade, and they're going to come back to school the next year, or starting school again. So some of those environmental and transitional things that happen in their life can also be a time when we notice a lot of mood and behavior changes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and those things take more time to resolve than one might anticipate.
Yes, absolutely.
I would say that it's a really good idea to keep in close contact with your pediatrician and your family doctor, because the fact of the matter is that the prevalence and incidence of mental health, like diagnosable mental health conditions, is much higher than in the neurotypical population. So a low threshold to investigate, a low threshold to treat, and the understanding that your person might not be able to tell you if they're just feeling teenagery versus like they feel like there's something wrong.
Yeah.
And Hannah and I have both seen, on a more positive side, some very heartwarming is an underestimation. Miraculous, just like some fabulous turnarounds that people have made when they have been given the correct medication at the correct dose, and the changes in responsiveness, participation, self-regard, some of these crucial things happen like really quite
very quickly
compared to what can be a slow decline in somebody's participation leading up to that.
Absolutely. And I think the medication thing is a big one, because it's a very scary thing to even think about your child or your loved one needing medication. But if we kind of resign ourselves to thinking about how the mood changes, there's a lot of chemical imbalances in the brain. There is something physically causing it. So just like something physical causing us pain and we take an Advil, oftentimes it's worth exploring medication to see if that can be helpful.
And we should talk directly about pain too. So when we say investigate health first, we're talking about pain management a lot of the time, or investigating sources of pain. The places that we look are in the mouth a lot, and the GI tract,
ears.
A lot. I say we. It's not like Hannah and I are in there with scopes, but
or medical practice.
the way that we kind of run through things is like, do we have dental abscesses going on? Are there root canals that need to happen? Is there like terrible constipation that's just overriding your ability to participate? Right.
And the thing is about pain is that people with Down syndrome have a very hard time. They have a lot of them have a very high tolerance for pain.
Scary high.
And are not very well aware of their pain until it gets to a level where you and I probably would be like, oh my gosh,
emergent.
We cannot, it's emergent, right?
Yeah.
So, and there's multiple reasons for it. Communication is definitely a big one. Oftentimes they don't know how to communicate effectively or in a way that may be perceivable by others. But the other thing also is, I'm going to put my OT hat on quickly, is that people with Down syndrome have a low sensory awareness in an area called interoception. So the receptors that are on your smooth muscles and glands internally in your body that give you the sensation of hunger and thirst and pain especially are weakened for people with Down syndrome. So oftentimes that constipation pain is not communicated to you in whichever way, whether they're saying it, whether they're showing it. And so this is why we have to do some additional investigations and have a checklist in our mind, being like, okay, like Marla said, let's check, GI issues, let's check dental issues, ear aches have caused so many difficulties with mood and behavior. So it's important to understand that pain perception looks very different from people with Down syndrome.
And it's a lot for parents to feel this pressure to be medically literate, and to have this really close ongoing relationship with doctors. It's something that Hannah and I like, but it's definitely not something that everybody likes. And I think that speaks to the importance of having a doctor that you like and trust, because chances are you will be in regular contact with that person. But those are some of the things that we look closely at. I think low threshold for sure. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Our next question is a biggie. If you, Marla, were a parent to a child with Down syndrome, what 3 things would you implement in the way you raise your child to give them the best life possible?
Ooh, this is a great one. Well, I have a few. So if I were so lucky as to have a child with Down syndrome, I would have an AAC system going from a really young age so that my kid can tell me what's up as opposed to being mad at me. That's a thing I would do. I would make sure that kid has friends who have Down syndrome. That's a
I would
thing
agree with you on that
I
one
would do. And I would fight like hell to make the school system work for my kid and not the other way around. That's what I would be up to. What would you be up to?
The friendship one was one of mine as well. I think we cannot overstate the importance of building friendships early on
Yeah.
for our kids.
Yeah.
But also making sure those friendships include equal amount, if not more, other kids with Down syndrome or other intellectual or developmental disabilities.
Yep.
And we have a really great episode on friendship this season that will highlight why that's important, but it is very, very important. My second thing from an OT perspective would be to just build a sense of, and honestly, for a lot of our kids, this kind of comes built in, but for some of them, it may not, but just trusting them enough to know that they can do things on their own early on, right? Build that sense of independence as early on as possible. And yes, as a parent, I'm sure as a parent, people are wanting to do things for their kids, but as they get older, they can help you with the laundry. They can help you with some of those household chores. They can have that self-determination to do some of those things at home and then autonomy. And honestly, it will pay dividends as they get older because it'll just allow you to step back a little bit and allow them to be more independent. So definitely building a sense of independence early on. And then I think my third thing would be to make sure that you don't forget about the bond that you need to create with your child. And Marla had alluded to this a bit earlier, that family relationship with your kid goes beyond any therapy, anything else, because none of that is going to work if the relationship is, not where you want it to be. And again, I understand life comes in the way. There's lots of different family situations and dynamics where that could be tricky, but your kid needs to trust you first before we can do anything else. So,
and whatever fun looks like for your family, do that.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You don't need to do what other people are doing. Whatever fun you can all have together, do that thing.
Yeah.
That seems, I want more than 3.
Well, you know what?
I want Hannah's answers too.
This is our podcast, so we can keep going if you want to.
No, I want your answers.
We make the
too.
rules. No, I mean, I think those are my 3, the friendship and the independence and the relationship. But I think also, this is to the parents directly that are listening. I think just creating my community in my village.
Yeah.
Right. Try to surround yourself with people. Try to connect with other families that have people with Down. And if you don't know, because that's a thing. Some families are either don't know where to start or they're nervous about it. So talk to the people in your community. Talk to if you are if you're connected to the DSRF. Talk to us. But try to find, because the thing is, us therapists can tell you what we think, but it means nothing unless it's coming from another parent.
Yeah.
Right. And the only other person who will understand your experience is another parent raising a child with Down syndrome. So, and I found that so many of our families have found that so valuable. And we do like to connect our families.
We do.
But yeah, that would be another one for me too.
That's a really, really good one too. Yeah, is being a part of the community, which comes at a different speed for everybody, depending on how they're feeling about it, coming to terms with the things that they may or may not have expected about being a parent.
Absolutely.
Those are good answers.
Yeah.
This last question here is just so cute.
We did not put this question in. We promise this came in from a listener.
Oh my gosh, this is so funny. But what's our favorite thing about each other? And then I read this the first time and I just about cried. So
I know. Yeah.
I'm going to go first. Okay. So anybody who had a chance to meet somebody like Kid, I'm going to cry.
Don't do it. I don't want to do it either.
Oh, it's so silly.
Here's
but
a
it's
tissue
not.
for you too.
Everybody would be lucky to know Hannah. They'd be so lucky. Hannah is just a gift to everybody that she comes across. We're just gonna weep.
Why are you
look at each other?
Should we just sob on the podcast?
Probably. Oh, geez.
Oh goodness.
What's my favorite thing about Wonder that is Hannah? Oh boy. Or like I can pick one favorite thing about Hannah, except that she's so now I need Kleenex.
Tissue.
Who sent this?
Both, yeah.
My goodness. Hannah's passion and contributions, many plural, to this community are immense and go much further than the constraints of this project and this podcast. And very few people that I've ever met show such dedication and commitment and willingness to learn and put other people first. I'd like ever in my life have I met somebody so fabulous. Really.
Oh, God.
It's true.
Oh, okay. Give me a second to gather myself now after that. Thank you. That's very sweet. I appreciate that. Marla and I have known each other for a very long time. So
We have.
for those of you that don't know, our friendship goes before we even became professionals.
Yeah,
Like, we met.
Coming up on 15 years,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah. We've known each other for a very long time. We've seen each other through, a lot of ups and downs in our lives. We've supported each other. So I think we come at it. We also think very much alike, and we pride ourselves on that. And I think I've become a better person and also a better clinician from knowing Marla. She is very dedicated to what she does. She is very smart, very, very smart, and she pushes me to be better. But I've seen her as a mom, which has been the greatest joy, is to watch her as a parent, because she is just immensely dedicated to her kids. She's immensely dedicated to, supporting them in whatever way that they need support, and celebrating them in whatever way they need to be celebrated. And that is really just an amazing thing to watch. And I see the same thing she does at work. Same amount of love, same amount of dedication to her clients that do not want to leave her. They're like, no, we're sticking with you until as long as we can. And clients that have told me, or parents that have told me, and that, we really would be lost without her. So she's absolutely a gem of a human being and one of my favorite people. And I'm very, very lucky to work with you. I'm so happy that we work in the same area of DSRF, because
never moving.
this whole episode is basically us on a Tuesday morning at work.
Yeah.
Just talking about things, work stuff, life stuff.
goodness.
But yeah, but we also both collectively want to say a few things that we love about our lovely producer, Glenn Hoos, too, because if you guys just see his face right now.
He did not expect that.
As soon as we said that, because he's the kind of person that wants to be behind the scenes, but we are also very, very, we admire Glenn a whole lot, because Glenn and his wonderful wife, Christy, as well, who've been guests on this podcast before. I think you were our inaugural Family Spotlight. But Glenn, we honestly, definitely, we could not have done this whole 10 seasons without you. It was your initial idea and we hopped on board. But seeing Glenn as a dad, I've also known Glenn for a long time. We've known each other all a very long time. I've seen Glenn as a dad, and he's also gone through a lot of ups and downs. But man, the resiliency that you have and the dedication that you have to your family and to your work is amazing.
So much insight that I think is so valuable, that I wish we could put Glenn in front of the microphone 100%. A lot more than we can convince him to do. Because I do think that he's got a lot of things just really, really dialed in. And it shows. It shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will try to get him more in front of the mic. But we thank you very much, Glenn. Honestly, this could not have happened without you. But yeah, so that's the end of our episode.
100th episode, just a cry fest.
100th episode with a cry fest, and Glenn glaring at me for putting him in front of the spotlight, but that's okay. It wouldn't be the same if that wasn't the case, and we love you. Love you, Marla. And yeah, thank you to everybody. I think we should just say thank you to all of our listeners. Please do stay in touch with us. Let us know how we're doing. Tell us what you want to hear. And we really
want to keep us motivated to keep it going.
Absolutely.
I feel like we did like 3 seasons and we're like, that's probably all there is. And then here we are on season 10, because actually there's so much more.
We were really worried about running out of ideas for a while, and thankfully we have not. We have not. And I also wanted to just end this episode by saying thank you to all of our guests. We've had our colleagues at the DSRF, the ones that have come on here, many of them who've been nervous about doing podcasts. We are very, very lucky to work with all of you, and we love all of you. And thank you so much for your dedication to what you do, but also to all of our parents who've shared their stories, all of our medical professionals who've given their time. Yeah. They really indulged Marla and I in our medical nerddom. And yeah, every person that we've had as a guest, every student that we've had as a guest, every parent, you guys are all part of the success of this podcast. So thank you so, so, so much. And with that,
we'll close it off. Couldn't say it better than that.
Thank you.